It is the high point of the year. For a period, the game of the decade will be this one. Saturday Night Live was already having trouble on February 20, 1981. Charles Rocket then took a step that would permanently alter television. He uttered a single word during a live sketch that had never been heard on American television before. Within minutes, almost 300 people had called. As sponsors withdrew millions of dollars in advertising, NBC officials worried. Here's the startling bit, though. This was no coincidence. Rocket eventually came clean in 1992. It was all part of his strategy. However, the true question still stands. Was destroying everything for the sake of being remembered worth it? You may be surprised by the response. He was born in Bangangir, Maine, on August 28, 1949. However, this was no ordinary birth in a little town. Raymond H. Fogler, his grandpa, was a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy. A legacy like that is not overlooked. Charles, however, did not choose the family route. He was one of 8 children in a chaotic, noisy, and attention-seeking environment. He carried that wild energy with him throughout his life. He enrolled in the Rhode Island School of Design in 1967, at the age of 18. He initially wanted to drive a truck, but he ended up pursuing drawing and cinema instead. And he became a campus legend almost instantly. He was not only another student of art, he was everywhere. He produced movies, hosted events, and even collaborated with Dan Gosh to develop the surreal eco-superheroes, Lobo and Captain Packard. They genuinely disguised as those characters, and filmed the entire event when they disrupted a General Assembly meeting in 1968. Politicians were caught off guard. Rocket was unconcerned. He created avant-garde short films that combined live action and animation. Tits and Trucks was the name of one. When it was released in 1970, it sparked both controversy and praise. Students either adored him or worried where he would go next, since he pushed the envelope so far. He didn't merely watch music happen, he actively participated in it. He founded the rock group The Fabulous Motel in 1969. He sang. He was an accordion player. If it made logic, it didn't matter to him. Energy was what was important. During a performance on November 15, 1970, the amplifiers blew up. Fire started. People went into a panic. The bottles flew. 2 band members suffered injuries. Despite the turmoil, Rocket continued to play, avoiding objects and squeezing accordion notes into the mix. The police arrived. 5 people were taken into custody. Charles, however, was unfazed. His legend was shaped by that night. He poured his anger and sarcasm into underground zines as he was doing all of this. He created satirical comics from 1968 to 1971 that ridiculed professors, the war, and anything that appeared to be in a position of authority. He made school deans appear like clowns in a cartoon from 1970. The government detested it. In 1969, they attempted to deport him due to his pornographic drawings, but he persisted. He would sneak copies of the Zen into lounges and dorms at night with his friends. 200 copies were confiscated once. His fire was simply fueled by that. He was taking advantage of America's underground press explosion. Charles Rocket was the only one among thousands of college students doing the same thing. Before graduating in early 1971, he secured an internship at Providence's WJAR, a local television station. It was unpaid and not glamorous. The unemployment rate in America was about 12%. Charles, however, was unique. He edited footage from the Vietnam War. More than 50 hours a week, brutal, uncensored clips. He unintentionally broadcast uncensored protest video one day. Furious, over 300 viewers called in. Producers saw something, but it nearly cost him the internship. He made ingenious modifications. Test segments had an increase in viewership. He had a good idea. That May, he received his BFA, but he was tormented by a single incident. It was Earth Day on April 22, 1970. The police arrived. The situation deteriorated. He distributed pamphlets. He was taken into custody by officers for unruly behavior. He and 30 other people were crowded into a holding cell for 6 hours. He then said that it gave rise to his rebellious attitude without hesitation. Performance was no longer the only factor. It was intimate. During anti-war demonstrations that same month, more than 4,000 individuals were taken into custody. However, that moment was carried over into every part, joke, and issue Charles Rocket would subsequently encounter on national television. Charles Rocket married Beth Krellin in a surprising way in 1972. They exchanged vows on the battleship USS Massachusetts. with its enormous naval cannons towering in the background, rather than at a church or municipal hall. Family members were in disbelief. For Charles and Beth, this wedding suited their crazy energy and desire for something different, even though it wasn't the type of wedding they had imagined. They then relocated to Nashville after packing up. It wasn't glitzy. Under the name Charles Kennedy, he worked lengthy 12-hour stints as a production assistant at WTV, FTV for a meager $12 a year. He usually skipped meals in order to stay up to date. To make ends meet, Beth took work as a waitress. Even so, his sense of humor was evident. At one point, he pretended to be a celebrity and prank called his own station. His quick-talking manner began to get attention by 1973, but the tension was severe. Fights resulted from financial issues. Charles acknowledged that moving to Nashville wasn't just motivated by opportunity. In Rhode Island, where he had previously played accordion in a band called the Fabulous Motel, it was his means of escaping a stale art environment. Things began to change in 1974. Charles made the decision to change his given name to Charles Rocket. The name meant something to him, but some of his co-workers thought it was ridiculous and scoffed at it. He desired for his ascent to be as swift as a rocket. He eventually got a place on camera after relocating to Pueblo, Colorado, that same year. He was paid $18,000 to work as a weatherman for CoTV. His delivery of the forecast was what set him apart, not the prognosis itself. One day he would be in a dust storm dressed as a cowboy. He would improvise gags live on TV. On another day, it was successful. Within 6 months, ratings increased by 15%. He was memorable due to his height 6 and rich voice, yet several coworkers found him unsettling. Additionally, he began hosting The Super Show, a children's program in which he humored vintage 1950s songs. Every episode drew in about 10,000 children. But Rocket also had a chaotic side. He unintentionally broadcast a clip full of bloopers, live in 1974. He nearly lost his job as a result. He legally changed his name to Charles Rocket on July 15th of that year. He was no longer merely a cameraman. He was creating a reputation. Then came 1975. Rocket made the error of ad-libbing offensive jokes on live television, one evening during a massive snowfall that dumped 18 inches of snow. He sparked 200 irate viewer calls by making crude remarks about wind and comparing the storm to his ex on a bad day. The FCC became involved. His supervisors put him on 2 weeks of unpaid leave. He was forced to apologize to about 60,000 viewers on television. It's possible that some were crushed. Rocket simply dismissed it with a grin, claiming that although he made the weather more dramatic, tension existed behind the scenes. Beth suggested that he seek therapy. Their marriage suffered yet another setback. Even in the midst of the controversy, his inventiveness was acknowledged. He received a local Emmy for his reporting in 1976. In fact, that scandal increased his popularity. Ratings increased by 25%. However, the warning was obvious. Rocket was constantly breaking TV's rules. Rocket was back in Rhode Island by 1977. On June 15th, he started working at WPRI-TV in Providence, where he made $25,000. The Rocket Report was the name of it. This news wasn't typical. With a camera, Rocket went out into the streets and spoke to strange locals. Like the man who claimed to have been kidnapped by aliens. People adored it. The audience increased by 30%. Approximately 100,000 households watched. He also took home another regional Emmy in 1978. He continued to push boundaries. Nevertheless, he organized a fictitious riot on July 4, 1977, as part of a bit. It received 150 complaints and was briefly suspended. His superiors weren't laughing. Rocket, however, remained the same. He frequently argued with management, even leaving a meeting abruptly once. In certain portions, he played music while reporting, utilizing his accordion. It was deemed unprofessional by some, brilliant by others. But for Rocket, it was genuine. After the burnout in Colorado, returning to Rhode Island felt like a desperate reset, he later told friends. He walked the line between comedy and journalism week after week, and he didn't care who thought it was too much. In 1979, Charles Rocket, whose real name was Charles Clevery, was 30 years old and working as a news anchor in a small Colorado town. His job was steady but unmemorable. But everything changed when some demo tapes began to circulate at NBC. He produced 52 episodes that demonstrated that his style wasn't just a phase, but who he was. They included an oddity, phony street interviews, in which Rocket, referring to it as the Rocket Report, would mix serious news with outrageous jokes. At times, he would make fun of natural disasters. At other times, he would act as though the camera had captured a breakdown. At one point, he pretended to eat his microphone while live on television. Although those tapes contained 12 minutes of raw outtakes full of profanity, the scouts liked the chaos. So Rocket left Colorado that summer and moved to New York City, where he was getting $500 per episode for short guest spots on network shows within months. Some called it unprofessional, but others, particularly at NBC, called it genius. The most shocking thing was that he had no comedy training at all. It was all instinct and energy, and he was either going to make it or blow up. The following summer, in 1980, Saturday Night Live was in disarray, with its creator, Lorne Michaels, having left on May 24th. This was a huge jump from the $18,000 she made all year back home. With declining ratings, NBC was considering canceling the show, but producer John DeMannion was assigned to save it because she needed new faces quickly. That July, Rocket auditioned inside 30 Rockefeller Plaza with almost 200 other hopefuls. And he didn't hold back. Like his previous tapes, he arrived as a fake anchor. But this time he added even more chaos. He began shouting at the teleprompter. Then he screamed obscenities. Then he smashed a desk, and even cut himself on a piece of prop glass, all of which caused everyone to freeze, some to laugh, and some to be appalled. Although many believed he had blown his chance, DeMannion thought the show needed someone dangerous. And Rocket got the part. During those 3 crazy days of tryouts, he also developed an odd bond with another outsider, Eddie Murphy. His audition became notorious, with 17 swear words in one bit, the highest ever for an SNL tryout. About 50 performers made it to the callback stage by August, but Rocket stood out. He became friends with a young comic named Gilbert Gottfried in a gloomy New York studio with dim lighting and mounting tension. Gottfried was from loud comedy clubs, while Rocket was from quiet news stations. The audience laughed, but not everyone enjoyed their improvised, unsettling routine, in which they ridiculed deceased celebrities. Gottfried screamed in voices. Rocket remained cool and collected, and they joked that they were the rejects, while standing outside smoking and laughing late at night about how they didn't belong. DeMannion was shocked when Rocket threatened to quit unless he got his way. Meanwhile, Rocket was already causing trouble. In one callback alone, he demanded 14 changes to the script, more chaos, more profanity, and more destruction. One writer walked out, while others called Rocket conceited and a monster in one memo. She had already decided he would be the star. Rocket and Gottfried pulled a joke on Lorne Michaels at an after-party that month, which was amusing at the time, but also suggested that Season 6 would be a complete failure, and that Rocket's ego would help bring it down. Then came September, and on the 10th, Rocket signed a $40,000 contract. Now that he was officially a featured player on Saturday Night Live, he took a big risk by moving his wife Beth and their young son Zane from quiet Rhode Island to a cramped apartment in Manhattan that cost $1,200 a month. However, Rocket was not afraid to make a bold statement in an interview with the New York Times that month, claiming he would become the next John Belushi. Not to be outdone, he launched his own recurring VIT called The Rocket Report, running into New York streets with a film crew. These sketches weren't safe. In one, he chased cabs on foot. He was injured twice that season. He vowed to dominate the show, aiming for 12 sketches per episode, a number that no other cast member had even attempted. DeMannion continued to defend him despite the network's apprehension, even going so far as to call him a cross between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, which only made matters worse. Rocket began to demand top billing, and he quarreled with other cast members over airtime. The writers and crew became weary, and by the end of that season, the ratings had fallen to an average of 4.2, and by the following year, almost 70% of the cast would have left. On February 21, 1981, Saturday Night Live was already having a difficult season when everything went awry. Charles Rocket, who was supposed to be one of the show's rising stars, made an appearance in a sketch that parodied the well-known Who Shot Jr. scene from the television series Dallas. "Oh man, it's the first time I've ever been shot in my life," Rocket stated nonchalantly, as everyone gathered around him on camera while he was in a wheelchair and acting as though he had been wounded. Everything changed when he said, "I'd like to know who did it." The audience gasped. And although there were awkward giggles, the horror was genuine. For the first time the F-word was used live on American television. NBC's phones began to ring nonstop, and within minutes, over 300 people had called to voice their displeasure. Behind the scenes, chaos broke out, and producer Gene Dumman was terrified because the FCC could fine them for up to $25 per violation. The network panicked, and censors scrambled. It was in danger of being shut down completely, and executives began to question whether live performances were worth the risk anymore. The episode averaged 12 million viewers, far less than the show's peak of 20 million, and Rocket just sat there calmly as if nothing had happened. But that calmness only made it worse. The F word was uttered at precisely 12:48 a.m. The camera captured Charlene Tilton gasping, "Oh my God," as the other actors froze. Gilbert Gottfried had tried not to laugh, and Gail Matus stared in disbelief. The director, Dave Wilson, lost it in the control room, slamming his hand on the console and shouting, "That's it. Live TV is over at that point." Approximately 15 million homes had just watched the unfiltered moment. At about 50 calls per minute, the calls continued. A boycott of NBC was even threatened by some. However, Rocket had previously crossed the line. He has previously improvised edgy lines. However, this one went too far. That same evening, NBC sent out a dozen internal warnings. The production was already having trouble with last-minute alterations to the script and almost any rehearsals. There were 7 further near misses. With live swearing in that season alone, it was tense backstage. Cast members were reportedly yelling at one another. The sponsors went into a frenzy. General Electric's advertising revenue was $2 million. Later, Rocket attempted to dismiss it, telling someone it was only a word. NBC, however, wasn't amused. The fact that Rocket wasn't fired immediately is unexpected. Rather, he was compelled to embark on what was referred to as an apology tour. He spoke with about 20 network executives from February 22 to March 6. He had to read the same phony-sounding line repeatedly during the lengthy meetings. "Although I sincerely apologize for my poor decision," he was incensed in private. He attributed the disarray to the haste with which things were done. He said that 3 separate writers had given him contradictory notes, and that he had only had 4 hours to practice. What's even more stunning is that he was paid $5,000 in overtime for those apology meetings. He was exhausted from working 18-hour days. That same week, there were even 5 documented instances of yelling bouts between the cast members. Because they feared a lawsuit, NBC did not fire him right away. They made him do awkward photo ops with station bosses, smiling for the camera while he was boiling within because his contract guaranteed him 13 episodes. The show was going through a difficult period. Workers were leaving in droves. 2 of the dressing rooms had cocaine. In a matter of months, about half of the staff was replaced. The show continued after the scandal. Although it caused the subsequent program to reach 14 million viewers, the damage had already been done. In some way, Rocket made a comeback for Bill Murray's March 7 program. Although he passed it flawlessly, behind-the-scenes sources claimed he was already marked. Producer Dick Ebersol took Gene Dumanian's place on March 10 and promptly cleaned house. He dismissed Rocket along with the majority of the 6 performers. NBC cut the budget by $1.2 million. Here's something nobody anticipated, though. Even before Rocket used the F word, Everill had been preparing to fire him. According to January memos, he had previously received a warning for skipping rehearsals and arguing with writers over the many changes to the script. It was made easy by the profanity. Fans did, however, attempt to have him reinstated. More than 500 petitions were signed by NBC. 13 million people watched his last program, more than the previous week. Rocket's career never recovered. Despite Ebersol's later claim that the dismissal was primarily a creative choice, he only had 7 small jobs over the course of the following 2 years. The controversy followed Rocket around and cost NBC $500,000 in ad sales. Then something quite unthinkable happened. Rocket eventually acknowledged that he had planned the F-bomb in an interview conducted in 1992. At a Manhattan bar the night before February 20th, he promised his buddies that he would make them remember him. He had been in a rage for weeks. The ratings were rapidly declining. The number of viewers per show dropped from 18 million the year before to just 10 million that season. After only 5 performances, a guest took his place for the weekend update. There was a 20% reduction in salaries. Knowing the censors were preoccupied, Rocket practiced the phrase in his changing room and timed it precisely. Eddie Murphy would later refer to it as suicidal genius. Drug parties were common throughout the season. 3 individuals were admitted to the hospital. For surrounding herself with people who only said yes, Rocket blamed producer Gene Dunman. Following his termination, he was placed on a network TV blacklist. He struggled with depression. He attempted suicide in 1985, but inexplicably, he began to reappear. Rocket debuted as Bruce Willis's sibling on the television series, moonlighting in 1985. Between 1985 and 1989, he starred in 12 episodes as Richard Addison. Critics praised his charm and irony in the character. This was a significant occasion. He was on a popular show with actual screen time, after being sacked for using profanity on live television. Although people's perceptions of him started to change, he was unable to completely avoid the image. On February 14, 1986, he appeared as a guest star on Miami Vice. He portrayed a shady businessman involved in drug trafficking. Even though it was just one episode, it had an effect. His history nearly caught up with him once more that year. After a scuffle at a party in 1983, he was detained for public intoxication. He shouted profanities and destroyed a glass. He had a blood alcohol content of 0.15. He was given a 6-month counseling term and spent a night in jail. He almost crumbled after the arrest. After attempting suicide in 1984, he began working as a freelancer. It sustained him. Rocket portrayed a significant antagonist in the 1987 science fiction series, Max Headroom. Up till 1988, he made appearances in all 14 episodes. In a world where television controlled everything, he portrayed a chilly, cunning boss. He was praised by critics as being ideal for the part, but even that show was abruptly canceled. Beginning in March 1987, he had shot it in Vancouver. A world fixated on screens was foreseen by the show. Once destroyed by a live broadcast, Rocket was now portraying a man who dominated what the world saw. Although he received plaudits for his performance, the gig ended too soon. He began doing voice acting in anime between 1986 and 1989. He voiced a variety of villains and aliens on the Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. He contributed to over 20 of the 65 episodes. This calmed him down. Without the stress of being on camera, it was labor. Even so, there were persistent whispers about his past. Usually by himself, he recorded in New York. Children adored the show. Every week, about 5 million people watched. Piece by piece, he was reconstructing. More jobs followed. He appeared in Earth Girls Are Easy in 1988. He portrayed a dishonest physician. The film was a failure, losing more than $6 million. Rocket, however, made a mark. He played a little but significant part in Dances with Wolves in 1990. The film went on to earn over $400 million and won 7 Oscars. Despite having only a few scenes, Rocket's height, he was 6, gave his character authority. He was once more plagued by the memory of what had transpired in 1981. He made an appearance in Hocus Pocus in 1993. He portrayed Dave Dennison, the father. Despite its initial poor performance, the film went on to become a cult favorite. He played the antagonist in Dumb and Dumber in 1994. Fans still quote his character, Nicholas Andre's lines, yet he only received $50. Despite the movie earning close to $250 million. He and the directors disagreed on tone. He played the creep, the slime ball, and the person who yells and snaps once again. He was unable to break the pattern. He had a few TV appearances between 1995 and 2003, including voice roles in Titan A and Static Shock. But his career was coming to an end. Charles Rocket was discovered dead in a peaceful field close to his Canterbury, Connecticut home on a chilly October morning in 2005. He had used one of his own tools to cut his throat. His workshop produced the blade. His age was 56. There was only silence, no note, no indications of fighting, no witnesses. Although the manner was uncommon, authorities declared it suicide 10 days later. The number of people who commit themselves in this manner is extremely small. He was discovered by his wife, Beth. Charles was the type of person who confronted issues head-on rather than disappearing into a field and bleeding alone. According to many who knew him, once he spoke about a moment that had followed him like a plague. Millions watched it live on television.